There is a particular stillness that settles over the western edge of the Cotswolds as evening drifts into night. The last colour fades from the escarpment, the beech trees darken into tall silhouettes, and the steep valleys gather their own soft hush. It is a landscape shaped by centuries of footsteps and forgotten paths, a place where the woods seem to remember more than they reveal. On quiet nights, when the breeze moves gently through the leaves and the distant lights of the Severn Vale flicker below, these hills offer a kind of calm found nowhere else. Tonight's journey leads through the woods and forests of the Western Cotswolds: Cranham, Slad, Buckholt, Painswick Beacon, and Cooper's Hill. These places have long carried whispers of strange moments, a figure glimpsed between the trees, footsteps where no walker should be, a voice that seems to travel without a source. The stories that follow are drawn from local folklore and old village recollections, each shaped into a tale of gentle unease and quiet reflection. There are no shocks here, no sudden frights, only the slow unfolding of atmosphere and memory, meant to guide you toward rest. These western slopes hold a beauty that lingers. In daylight, they are bright with beech canopies and long views across the vale. At dusk, they grow more intimate. Paths narrow, shadows stretch, and the woods breathe in their long, ancient rhythm. To wander them after dark is to step into a world that feels older than the roads and houses below, a world where the boundary between past and present becomes soft and permeable. As you listen, allow the landscape to settle around you, the quiet footsteps on a leaf-strewn path, the distant call of a bird settling for the night, the gentle rustle of branches shifting overhead. Let the stories guide you deeper into the stillness, one tale at a time, until sleep finds you in its own unhurried way. And so, we begin in the quiet heart of Cranham Woods, where the paths twist through high, pale beech trunks, and the air carries the faintest echo of something or someone keeping watch. Edward Markham arrived in Cranham just after sunset, when the last pale light gathered along the ridge and the woods began to darken into quiet shapes. The air held that cool, late autumn stillness he always loved, a softness that suggested the world was settling into itself. He had come for a quiet walking weekend, hoping the western slopes of the Cotswolds would offer a little peace after a restless few months. The guest house owner pointed him toward a narrow track at the edge of the village. "Straight up into the beech woods," she'd said. "Evening's the best time. The trees keep hold of the light longer than you'd think." He took a walking stick from the stand by the door and set off. Almost immediately, the path rose, climbing between smooth, pale trunks that stretched upward like columns. Cranham Woods always felt high-ceilinged. Even in dim light, the canopy seemed airy, vaulted, almost architectural. Leaves, dry and crisp, shifted under his boots with a sound like gentle paper. Edward moved slowly, letting his breath fall into a steady rhythm. He liked how the world softened here, how the trees muffled distant sounds, how the shadows pooled gently rather than sharply. A few birds settled above him, their wings giving a soft beat through the branches. Beyond that, the woods were peaceful, their calmness almost inviting. After 20 minutes, he paused to take in the view. The path bent slightly to the left, curving around a small rise. As he adjusted his grip on the stick, a faint warmth touched the edge of his vision. A soft, yellow glow ahead, low to the ground. He frowned. It looked like a lantern, but not quite like one carried by a person. The light had a stillness to it, as if hanging from a hook in a place where no hook could possibly be. He stepped closer. The glow swayed gently, as though stirred by a breeze that did not reach him. "Someone out late," he murmured, though the thought didn't sit comfortably. The woods were so quiet he would have heard footsteps long before seeing a light. Rounding the bend, he stopped. The lantern, if lantern it was, hovered a short distance from the path, just beyond a cluster of beech trunks. It gave off a warm, steady glow, illuminating a small patch of leaves beneath it, but leaving the trees untouched, as though the light chose its boundaries with care. And there was no person beside it. Edward took a cautious step forward. The lantern drifted back, not abruptly, not fearfully, just a gentle retreat deeper among the trees. Another step, another retreat. He felt no alarm, only a curious pull. There was something peaceful about the movement, almost as though the lantern meant to guide rather than frighten. Cranham Woods were known for their shifting side tracks, appearing and disappearing with the seasons. Perhaps someone had hung the lantern to mark a path, yet the air held no sense of human presence. "Wait," he said softly, half to himself. To his surprise, the lantern paused. The stillness around him deepened, as though the woods themselves were listening. Then the light dipped, just slightly, and resumed its drifting movement. Edward followed. The trees grew closer as he left the path, their trunks rising like silent guardians. The ground became uneven, soft with old leaf mold and the hidden swell of roots. Yet the way forward felt easy, as though the lantern smoothed the way with its glow. They moved like that for several minutes, the lantern drifting ahead, Edward trailing behind in quiet fascination. The woods were calm, their shadows deep but gentle, and the air held a faint, cool scent of damp earth. Eventually, the lantern stopped beside a fallen tree. Its glow brightened a little, casting a soft circle of light over the moss-covered trunk. Edward approached slowly. A voice spoke behind him. "You followed it too." He turned quickly, startled but not uneasy. A woman stood across the fallen tree, her hands in the pockets of a dark walking jacket. She looked comfortable in the woods, as though she belonged here. Steady posture, calm eyes, a faint smile that reached them. "I didn't hear you," Edward said. "No one ever does," she replied gently. "Not when the lantern appears." He glanced back at the glow. "Do you know what it is?" She stepped closer, studying the lantern with quiet familiarity. "Some say it's the woodsman who lived here long before the cottage collapsed. Others think it's something older, a memory the woods refuse to let go of. But whatever it is, it always leads people to this spot." Edward looked around. In the dim light, he could just make out the faint outline of stone footings beneath the leaves, a foundation half claimed by time. "There was a cottage?" he asked. She nodded. "A solitary man lived here, a woodcutter. One winter he didn't return to the village. They found the cottage empty, the fire dead, and the lantern missing." She paused. "Search parties walked for days, but the woods can be confusing when the snow falls. Paths shift, footprints vanish. They never found him." The lantern flickered softly, almost sympathetically. "Since then," the woman continued, "people see this light near dusk. Some say it guides lost walkers back to the path. Others believe it's still searching, trying to lead someone home." Edward watched the glow with a gentle ache in his chest. Not fear, but a kind of quiet sadness. "Does it ever mislead?" he asked. The woman smiled faintly, only if someone wishes to be lost. For a while they stood without speaking, the lantern casting warm light into the stillness. Then, with a slow upward drift, it began to move again, this time back toward the main track. "It's ready," she said. "Come. It will guide us down." They followed in silence. The lantern moved at an easy pace, illuminating roots and hollows, making the descent feel smoother than before. Edward felt the woods relaxing around them, their earlier stillness shifting into something more welcoming, almost protective. When they reached the edge of the village, the lantern brightened once, almost like a parting gesture, then dimmed slowly into the dusk until nothing remained but the faint glow of windows below. Edward turned to thank the woman, but she was gone. No footsteps, no rustle of leaves, nothing but the cool night breeze drifting through the trees. He stood quietly for a moment, letting the calm settle over him. Then he walked back toward the warm lights of Cranham, the memory of the lantern glowing gently in his mind, as soft and steady as the woods themselves. Daniel Kerr came to Painswick Beacon for the view. Guidebooks promised that on a clear day you could see far into Wales, the Severn shining like a strip of pewter, the Malverns rising in a faint blue line. But what drew him there on a damp October afternoon was something far smaller. A paragraph in a local blog describing a stone hidden on the western slope. A flat slab said to be older than the hill fort above it. A warning attached to it: disturb that stone, and the beacon will see you down the quickest way it knows how. Daniel, who spent his weekdays in an office, lived for things like this. Forgotten markers, small terrors tucked into rural corners, stories older than maps. So he parked by the golf course, shouldered his rucksack, and set out. The beacon rose in smooth, clean lines. He followed the main path to the hill fort, paused to take in the grey, open view, and then turned toward the west side, where the slope fell sharply into beech and holly. He left the path and descended. The air cooled at once. Damp leaves softened underfoot. A pheasant thrashed out of sight. Daniel checked the screenshot on his phone. A holly thicket above a shallow run of stones. Footprint-like groove on the upper face. Locals leave it alone. He found it sooner than expected. A ragged wedge of holly clinging to a fold in the hillside, with a flat slab half buried beneath. Moss obscured most of it. Up close it was clearly old, the edges softened, the surface worn down by time and weather. He brushed it clean. A shallow groove crossed the top. Nothing obvious, but unmistakably shaped by repeated pressure. A footstep, perhaps, or the memory of one. Something in the stillness around him deepened. Daniel felt absurdly as though kneeling beside something sleeping lightly. He hesitated. Then he got his fingers under the edge and levered. The stone resisted, then shifted with a faint sucking sigh from the damp soil. He lifted it just enough to see beneath, compacted earth, roots, and a faint glimmer of rounded chalk. Nothing more. He let the slab fall back, not quite where it had been. The woods seemed to take notice. A moment's pause, a slight change in the air, almost like a person glancing up at the sound of their name. He tried to laugh it off, stood, took a photo, and began climbing back toward what he thought was the main slope. He had not gone far before the hill subtly betrayed him. The ground angled more steeply than he remembered. The light dimmed beneath the tightening canopy. He expected to cross a familiar trail within minutes, but found only more beech trunks, more hollies clumped in odd formations, more dips and rises repeating like a pattern he couldn't quite break. He checked his phone. No signal. The map refused to load. A small, practical anxiety crept in. The beacon wasn't large, but in the dull light and thickening trees, direction grew muddled. He chose a line and climbed. Within a dozen steps, the earth slumped under him. He caught a branch and steadied himself, heart jumping. The slope was more treacherous than it had appeared from above. As he caught his breath, a sound drifted across the hillside. Footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. They came from above and to his left. Someone walking with careful weight on damp soil. "Hello," he called. "Sorry, can you point me back to the main path?" The footsteps stopped. Silence pooled in the trees. Thick, listening. He swallowed, adjusted his rucksack, and angled upward again. Then the footsteps came again, this time behind him. Not rushing, not sneaking, just walking. A steady tread out of step with his own. He did not turn. "Someone there?" he asked, and hated the quaver in his voice. No answer. He walked faster. The hillside steepened. Loose scree shifted under his boot. He caught himself on a beech trunk. The beacon's western face dropped sharply here toward the long-abandoned quarry, where the air always felt hollow. Something moved above. not a clear figure, just a vertical darkness between the trunks, tall enough to unsettle, still enough to be wrong. It did not sway with the wind, it did not shift its weight. It simply observed, a narrow absence where light ought to fall. Daniel's mouth dried. "Look," he said quietly into the dimness. "I'm leaving." "I didn't mean—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't want to name the stone aloud. He turned from the watcher and pressed upward, placing each step with care. The footsteps resumed behind him. Never close, never far, just following. Too steady, too patient. He angled again, but the slope curved him naturally toward the edge of the quarry bowl. The air grew colder, more hollow. His instinct insisted he was walking toward a drop. He slowed. The footsteps stopped. He looked down the slope and realized how quickly he had been drawn toward danger. The ground here fell away at an angle that could easily turn a misstep into a slide. Behind him, a faint shift of weight, the soft suggestion of something adjusting its stance. He turned. For a heartbeat, he saw it plainly. No face, no features. Only a tall, upright silhouette, darker than the trees, yet somehow thinner, as though it were pressed from deeper shadow. Its posture held an unmistakable intent. Not malice, not anger, but attention, fixed wholly on him. Daniel stepped back. The soil slipped from under his heel. He grabbed for a branch, missed, and went down the slope in a rush of leaves and grit. He struck a jut of stone, rolled, and slid into the scrub near the lower edge of the quarry. The fall was not long, but it was enough. He lay still, half concealed by bramble, the color of his jacket too close to the earth to draw quick attention. Above, the watching shadow remained a moment longer, then drew itself back into the woods, as though the hillside were reclaiming its shape. Night came quickly. Rain followed. The beacon softened the signs of his passing. They found him the next morning, when a dog from the village refused to leave the edge of the hollow. The inquest called it a tragic slip, the kind that happens when light fades early on steep ground. A week later, an older man from Painswick walked quietly up the beacon alone. He carried no phone, no map. His boots found the ancient paths without hesitation. He climbed to the holly thicket. The stone lay skewed, just as Daniel had left it, half off its bedding, the groove across the top filled with wet earth dark as soot. The old man knelt, set his hands beneath the slab, and eased it back into its place. He pressed the edges down firmly as though putting a lid on something that should never have been opened. "You've done what you can," he murmured. The beacon gave no reply. It didn't need to. But as he stood and stepped back, he noticed something that hadn't been there before. The groove across the top of the stone, once shallow and half erased by weather, seemed a fraction deeper, as though something had settled its weight into it at last. Martin Hale first saw the long man on a dull, colourless evening, when Buckholt Woods had sunk into that uncertain half-light between day and night. He had moved back to the Western Cotswolds after 20 years away, returning to the old cottage his mother once kept on the lane below Cooper's Hill. A failed marriage, thinning work, and a restless, needling kind of sadness had pushed him homeward. Out here, the air always felt cleaner, quieter, as though the woods themselves held space for a man to breathe. Most evenings he took the same circuit, through the scrub behind his garden, up into the tall beech stands, and along a narrow contour path that let thin strips of the Severn Vale appear and vanish through the trunks. The ritual eased him. The scent of chalk and leaf mould, the hush of tall trees, the last light on the river fading into grey. On this evening, cloud pressed low, flattening the dusk. The woods darkened early. Martin climbed steadily, hands deep in his pockets, his boots crunching the softened leaves. He had walked perhaps 10 minutes when he noticed he was not alone. A figure stood uphill between two pale beeches, still, too still, arms hanging at its sides, its outline a little too long in the limbs, as though someone had tugged an ordinary frame out of proportion. The light was low enough to muddle detail, but something in the posture prickled at him. He slowed. "Evening," he called, as one walker to another. The figure did not move, not a tilt of the head, not a shift of balance, just that rigid stance, facing gently downslope. Perhaps another person had stopped to listen to the birds. Perhaps it was nothing at all. He walked on. The trunks slid across his view. The figure vanished behind them. At the next bend, the path rose and curved back on itself. Martin glanced uphill. The figure stood closer now. Same two beeches, same pose. But it had stepped, or arrived, several yards nearer. He would have heard anyone move on dry leaves. A thin, involuntary chill lifted the back of his neck. He walked on, more carefully. When the path straightened, the long man stood at the edge of the track, barely 20 paces away. It was unmistakably tall, thin and stretched, like the idea of a man, rather than the thing itself. Its coat hung too straight, without crease or sway. Its legs appeared jointed oddly, too long between knee and ankle. Its hands rested lower than they should, and the head, slightly tipped, gave the impression of someone examining him with mute curiosity. The face lay in shadow. He stopped. The path narrowed here, a steep drop falling away to his right. He felt suddenly exposed, a man on a ledge with too much empty space at his shoulder. "Can I help you?" he asked, though he doubted the figure knew speech at all. No answer, no movement. Martin edged to the inner side of the track, giving it room, though he doubted room mattered. He moved with the care one uses around a trapped animal. Slow, deliberate, hands visible. He blinked. The long man now stood several paces farther up the slope. He had not seen it move, not even a flicker of motion. One moment it had been almost close enough to touch. The next, it was deeper among the trees. Same stiff posture, same tilt of the head, watching him. A cold tightness settled under his ribs. He walked on. At home that night, he stood at his kitchen window, staring up at the dark edge of beechwood along the ridge. No shape broke the line of the trees. The memory unsettled him. Those two long limbs, that impossible stillness. But he told himself it was tiredness. Shadows. The tricks of returning to an old place with old stories. For several evenings he avoided the contour path, staying low where the woods grew younger. Yet every dusk he found himself studying the ridge, waiting for the narrow silhouette that did not come. A week later, a storm front swept through. 3 days of rain and mist that blurred the land into shifting grey. On the fourth evening the rain eased, and a restless heaviness pulled him outside. His feet took him uphill without his choosing. The beech canopy dripped steadily, water clinging to bare twigs. Mist pooled in the folds of the slope. At the place where he had first seen it, the long man waited, exactly where it had stood a week before, framed by the same two trunks, as if it had paused time itself until he returned. He froze. No walker stood like that. No human ever had limbs so long, posture so straight, stillness so complete. The proportions were unmistakably wrong. He walked on. At the next bend, the trees slid across his view. When he looked again, the long man stood nearer, perfectly occupying another pair of trunks, as though the woods had arranged themselves around it. Gone, then present. Far, then close. Never moving. Martin's breathing thinned. Again, on the following curve. Gone, then back, closer still. By the time he neared the narrowest part of the path, where the slope fell sharply away and old washout scars hid beneath slick leaves, his nerves were stretched taut. He remembered a boy slipping there when he was young, saved only by an adult's quick grip. The soil gave easily on wet nights like these. He slowed. The long man stood on the bank just above the washout, closer than ever before, no more than 10 paces away. From this distance, he saw details he wished he hadn't. The neat row of buttons down the coat, the faint suggestion of a collar too high on the throat, the hands hanging too low, the legs thin as dead branches. The head tilted a fraction more as if gauging him, assessing. His body urged him to turn back, but the track was too narrow. Turning meant losing sight of it. He forced himself to breathe. Stay where you are. Absurd, perhaps. But the long man stayed. He edged inward along the track, hugging the slope. Leaf mush slid under his boot. His walking stick probed for stable ground. He did not lift his eyes as he passed the point beneath the figure. Something deep in him felt certain that if he truly looked at it from that close, the shape would imprint itself in him forever. Only when he reached firmer earth did he glance back. The bank was empty. The long man now stood farther up the slope, occupying once again the first place he had seen it that night. Same gap between trees, same unnatural length, same stillness. Fear fluttered low in his chest. But beside it came another sensation, colder, quieter. The figure had stood above the washout, not on the edge, not below, where it could have startled him into a slip. Above, watching, not guiding, no, nothing so kind, but influencing his direction all the same. He finished the circuit with care. At the final thinning of the beechwood, he turned once more. Far back on the slope, almost swallowed by the mist, a tall, narrow silhouette stood between two trunks, sharp as a pencil mark against the fading light, watching. At home, kitchen lamp burning softly, Martin held a mug in both hands and stared at the ridge through his window. Rain whispered against the glass. The woods were a black stripe across the sky, featureless. And yet he felt it, a presence still up there, occupying whatever point in the trees it wished, patient as stone. Some hauntings, he realized, were not echoes of sorrow or grief. Some were older than that, stranger, bound not to people but to the land itself. The long man of Buckholt was no guardian, no lost wanderer. He was simply there, ancient, watchful and wrong, appearing closer each time you dared to look, never seen to move, always waiting on the ridge between safety and the fall. Helen Armitage had lived in the Slad Valley all her life, in a small stone cottage perched halfway up the western slope. From her kitchen window, she could see the whole sweep of the valley, the winding lane, the clustered rooftops, the fields rising in soft folds toward the high woods. She had grown so familiar with its contours that she could tell the season simply by the texture of the shadows or the way the evening light settled in the folds of the hill. Her life was not dramatic, nor did she wish it to be. She worked mornings at the village shop, spent afternoons tending her small garden, and each evening, without fail, she took the same quiet walk. She would push open the wooden gate opposite her cottage, step into the sloping meadow, and follow the narrow path that curved gently toward the trees. It was a ritual older than habit, something she'd begun long before she understood why it calmed her so deeply. The valley always seemed to breathe more slowly at dusk, and she, in turn, breathed more slowly with it. That evening, a soft blue-grey light rested across the hills. A faint mist gathered in the lower meadows, drifting in pale ribbons above the grass. The air was cool, carrying the clean scent of damp earth and the distant trace of wood smoke from a cottage chimney. Helen stepped onto the path, her boots brushing the dew-laden grass, and let her thoughts unspool. This part of the day always felt like a threshold, neither wholly light nor dark, neither busy nor still. And the land embraced that in-between quality with ease. Halfway to the woods, she paused. A sensation, subtle but unmistakable, brushed against her awareness. The feeling of being observed gently and without malice, the way one notices another person's presence before hearing their voice. She turned, scanning the slope. The hillside lay as it always did, Grazing sheep scattered near the stone boundary walls, a lone hawthorn tree leaning at an angle, a distant window flickering to life as someone lit a lamp. Nothing moved, nothing stood out. Helen smiled faintly. Slad Valley had always been full of small quirks, echoes, shifting breezes, the sense of someone passing just out of sight. The older villagers often said the land had a long memory. She had grown up hearing stories of watchers and guardians, shadows that lingered from older times. She had never truly believed in anything supernatural, but neither had she dismissed the stories outright. In the valley, it was easy to accept that not everything wished to be explained. She continued walking. As she approached the woodland edge, the air cooled further. Beech leaves rustled gently overhead, catching the last of the fading light. She stepped beneath the first arching branch, following the familiar rise of the track. A short ascent, a bend to the right, then the narrow approach to a long-abandoned quarry ledge. It was one of her favorite spots, a quiet place where the valley opened like a held breath. She reached the ledge and stood still for a moment. Below, the valley stretched in muted colors. Lamps glowed in the windows of two cottages. The last birds of evening traced soft arcs across the sky. A dog barked far down the lane, its echo softened by distance. The world felt perfectly at ease, until she sensed the presence again, stronger this time, unmistakably near, not in sound but in awareness, as if someone stood just behind her left shoulder. Helen turned slowly. Nothing moved among the trees behind her. But something else caught her attention. A patch of leaf litter pressed into a distinct impression. Not the scatter of an animal, nor the messiness of a hurried step. It looked almost deliberate, the earth shaped by someone kneeling or sitting for a time. She crouched, touching the soil. A faint warmth lingered, recently made. She rose carefully, listening with a stillness that matched the woods. The silence was thick, not empty, but attentive. The presence returned, a quiet, steady awareness from somewhere higher on the slope, beyond the reach of her vision. "Is someone there?" she asked softly, more out of courtesy than concern. The question settled into the stillness. No answer came, yet something seemed to shift in acknowledgement. A subtle folding of air, a faint change in the balance of quiet. Children in the village had once whispered about the watchers on the slopes. Farmers spoke of shapes glimpsed at twilight, not threatening but purposeful, like old guardians keeping patient vigil. Helen had half forgotten those tales. Yet standing there, in the hush of the quarry edge, she felt them settle around her with unexpected clarity. She stepped back onto the woodland path. A soft movement flickered between two beech trunks. A shape, dark yet translucent, as though formed from the thickening dusk itself. It held no clear form, no distinct face or height, only the impression of someone standing with quiet patience. Helen did not freeze. Instead, she felt a strange familiarity, as though recognizing an old rhythm in the land. "It's all right," she murmured. "I'm just passing through." The figure did not advance. It simply observed, its stillness carrying neither warning nor welcome, only presence. She took one careful step. Leaves shifted underfoot. When she looked again, the shape was gone, but the sense of attention remained, moving now a little farther up the slope. The presence followed her as she walked on, not close, not intrusive, but parallel, keeping an exact, respectful distance. Now and then she glimpsed a soft change in the shadows, a ripple of movement that blended with the trunks and undergrowth. She did not hurry. The woods felt companionable, their silence deep but warm. Whatever walked with her meant no harm. If anything, Helen sensed an old instinct in it, the instinct of watching over rather than leading astray. Reaching the stile at the far end of the path, she paused. The trees stood in a quiet assembly, the dusk thickening around them. "Good night," she said gently. A breath of wind or something like it shifted the upper branches, a subtle motion that echoed her farewell. Helen crossed the stile into the meadow. The presence remained at the boundary of the trees, not crossing into the open field. It watched until she reached the lower path, then faded into the rhythm of the woods. Back home, as she lit a small lamp, she glanced once more through the window. Darkness filled the valley, yet she felt no unease. Instead, a profound calm settled over her, the sense that the land around her was not empty, not indifferent, but quietly held by something old and patient. Not all hauntings, she thought, were born from sorrow or unrest. Some were simply guardians who lingered, watching over the place they once loved. Tom Berris had grown up with Standish Woods filling the skyline. From the back bedroom of his parents' house on the edge of the village, the trees looked like a dark, sloping wall rising to the old hill fort. As a child, he'd treated the woods as an extension of the garden, dens in hollows, secret tracks, and a fallen beech where he and his friends had sworn meaningless oaths they immediately forgot. The stories came later, not told outright, just dropped into conversations, muttered in the pub, or hinted at when weather changed. Little fragments about the woodman who still walked the upper paths, about hearing an axe when no work was going on, about listening to one's instincts near the edge of the hill. It was never a full tale, more like a quiet thread running beneath everything else. By his 30s, Tom lived in Cheltenham and returned to Standish mainly for Christmas and birthdays. Then his father died, and suddenly he was back most weekends, helping his mother manage the house and its silences. The view from the upstairs window hadn't changed. The dark line of trees still held the valley like a boundary. In the evenings, needing air, he put on his boots and went walking. He took his father's old route, through the kissing gate above the lane, across a sloping field, and into the woods by a crooked stile that had leaned the same way for decades. The narrow path wound to the hill fort's outer ring, followed the ridge, and eventually dipped to a broader woodland track. The woods were a comfort. The pale, smooth beech trunks rose in quiet rows. The earthworks felt familiar beneath his boots. Sometimes the path narrowed into a tunnel of hazel where the light went green even on bright days. One evening in late November, the weather changed. Low cloud pressed on the ridge. A faint mist gathered in the folds of the valley. By the time Tom shut the garden gate, the first suggestions of night had settled, the kind that makes woods feel older than they are. He stepped beneath the trees. Cold air held the scent of wet bark. Fallen leaves muffled his steps. Halfway to the hill fort he heard it. Thock, a single, heavy blow. Not the sharp bite of a modern axe, but something duller, older, as though an object was giving up its strength reluctantly. Thock. The rhythm was slow, unhurried, measured. He stopped and listened. The sound came from slightly ahead, just beyond the rise where the slope steepened. He knew the kind of work that happened up here. Conservation groups, loud saws, chatter. This was different. One tool, one pair of hands, and no voices at all. "Hello?" he called. "Anyone up there?" The axe fell silent immediately, not fading, stopping. The woods felt suddenly aware of him. He tried to laugh it off and continued. The ground dipped into the outer ring of the fort, the ditch catching sound so that even his breathing felt like an intrusion. He reached the inner ring before anything else happened. There, the woods opened briefly. Down the western slope he could see glimpses of the vale, blurred with cloud. Movement flickered at the edge of his vision. A dark shape stood motionless among the trees, 20 yards down the slope. At first, he took it for a stump or boulder. Then the shape resolved into the outline of a person, broad-shouldered, slightly hunched, as though accustomed to carrying weight. Something long rested against its shoulder. A shaft, with a heavy, dull head near the ground. An axe, or what remained of one. No face, no detail. only the sense of a figure carved from the hill itself. Tom's chest tightened. The figure was not looking at him. Its attention seemed fixed on a section of the lower path where the ground softened each winter. More than once his father had warned him away from it. Rain undercut the soil there. It looked safe, but wasn't. Tom considered calling out, but felt no invitation in that stillness. It was not threatening, merely intent. They stood like that for several breaths. Tom on the ridge, the figure below, until a breeze stirred the branches and the shape was gone. Not moved. Gone. He made his way back down by the safer track, keeping distance between himself and the steeper paths. By the time he reached the stile, lamps were glowing in the village. That night, he slept badly. In half-dreams, he heard a sound echo softly in the dark. Thock. Pause. Thock. A week later, after rain had passed through, he set out earlier. He told himself the daylight would steady him. He hesitated at the stile, remembering the shape, but habit led him on. The woods smelled greener, the beech trunks darkened by rain. The earth was soft, but firm enough. He was not far from the hill fort when the axe began again. Thock. This time the sound seemed to pass through the trunks, not from any one direction. Some blows felt close, others muffled. There were no voices, no cracking branches, just that slow, deliberate rhythm. At a fork in the path, one way toward the inner ring, the other slanting toward the slope. Tom stopped. The blows faltered, almost as though waiting. He looked at the lower path. It appeared harmless, a gentle descent, a wet patch among many. But he knew better. Rain hollowed the ground there. A single false step could send him sliding into the scrub and stones below. A chill of instinct moved through him. The axe rang again. One measured strike, then another, and to Tom's ears, the sound landed somewhere beyond the dangerous ground, as though marking out a warning line. He turned toward the inner ring. As he climbed the earthwork, the blows retreated down slope, each one slightly further away, as if someone walked below him. Not guiding him, but placing themselves between him and the danger. From the top of the ring he saw the truth of it. The lower path passed closer to the fragile edge than he had ever realized. Much of the soil was resting on a hollow, the kind that looked solid until it didn't. And between two beeches at that exact point, the woodman stood. The outline was clearer now. Broad chest, strong arms, an axe resting against the slope. The head was bare, turned slightly toward the weak patch of earth. No features, only depth where a face ought to be. Tom felt fear and gratitude mingle in equal measure. "Thank you," he whispered. A breeze shook loose leaves from the canopy. When they settled, the woodman was gone. He didn't mention it to his mother. He didn't mention it in the pub. But when locals spoke, as they sometimes did, about near accidents, a man nearly crushed by a falling beech, another who slipped but was somehow pushed sideways rather than over. Tom listened with new attention. On his last weekend before the house was sold, he walked the woods once more. Dusk thinned the light over the vale. The path felt familiar in a way nothing else had since his father's death. As he turned for home, a sound drifted up through the trees. Thock. Pause. Thock. He didn't go looking. At the stile, he glanced back. The ridge stood dark against the sky. The woods massed together like a single presence. The axe fell once more. One deep, distant blow that felt as though it settled into the hill itself. Tom stepped down onto the lane. For the first time in weeks, he felt something ease inside him. Not every haunting in these western woods, he thought, came to frighten or harm. Some belonged to the old work of the place, watching the lines between path and drop, listening for missteps in fading light. And somewhere above the village, in Standish Woods, the woodman remained at his post, unseen more often than not, but never gone, his axe rising and falling at the quiet edge of danger. Thank you for listening to these Western Cotswold woodland stories, quiet tales drawn from ancient slopes, old hill forts, and the half-remembered folklore that lingers in the valleys. Each story is shaped to offer calm, atmospheric company as you drift toward rest, carrying the gentle unease that belongs to old places, but never the fear. If you enjoyed tonight's journey through the wooded edge of the Cotswolds, there are many more stories waiting, from haunted inns and lonely lanes to river valleys where history still walks at dusk. Until next time, sleep well, and may the quiet paths stay steady beneath your feet. Please subscribe to this channel to be alerted to the next episode of Ghosts of the Cotswolds.